Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi amma ba'd. The 12th basic term that the author is defining, he says, al-muhaddith هو من يشتغل بعلم الحديث رواية ودراية ويطلع على كثير من الروايات وأحوال رواتها. He says the muhaddith. What is a muhaddith? A muhaddith is a person who busies himself or who busies herself with ilm al-hadith, from the aspect of its narration, its report or reporting it, and also from the aspect of understanding and comprehending it. What does it mean? What does it include? What does it entail? What are the ins? What are the outs? What is the fiqh of the hadith, the rawat, the narrators, etc. And he is also the person who knows much about those narrators and those reporters. In other words, a muhaddith is a person who has a very good, strong understanding of the sciences of hadith with regards to ilm al-rijal, with regards to the ilal, with regards to the fiqh and the meanings of those narrations. In brief. Number 13, he says, al-hafidhu fihi qawlani ألف مرادف للمحدث عند كثير من المحدثين باء وقيل هو أرفع درجة من المحدث بحيث يكون ما يعرفه في كل طبقة أكثر مما يجهله. Then we have the hafiz. What is meant by the term hafiz? And this is also important for the layman to understand. In general, in brief, or not for the layman, but specifically for those who study these sciences, even in English. What is a hafiz? You hear the word hafiz ibn Hajar, hafiz al-Dhahabi. What does the word hafiz mean? According to the sciences of hadith, we know that the hafiz linguistically is someone who memorizes something or someone who protects something. He says here, there are two views on its basic understanding. First is that it's synonymous to the word of muhaddith. That a muhaddith is a hafiz and a hafiz is a muhaddith. And this is according to many of the people of knowledge. And the second are those who say that it is above the muhaddith and is beyond the muhaddith. And the hafiz is the one who knows more, or that which he doesn't know is far less that which he does know, of every single tabaqa of narrators. The 14th and final basic terminology or term is al-hakim. Al-hakim. What is a hakim? And the author doesn't explain it here linguistically, perhaps because it's obvious and known, but in general, the hakim is someone who gives a hukum, someone who passes judgment or ruling, someone who rules, whether he be a judge or a sultan or something like this. The word hakim means several things. He says, according to the sciences of hadith, هو من أحاط علما بجميع الأحاديث حتى لا يفوته منها إلا اليسير على رأي بعض أهل العلم. The hakim is the one who has total comprehensive knowledge of hadith. He is the absolute master of hadiths. And the things that he's unsure of and unaware of regarding prophetic narration says, yasir, just a small tiny bit, a few pieces here and there. But this man is what? He says he is a hata. His knowledge is deep, very strong, and he has in-depth ilm of the sciences of hadith. That's the end of that part of the introduction. Now the author is going to get into the first chapter. He says, Al-Bab al-Awwal, Al-Khabar. الفصل الأول تقسيم الخبر باعتبار وصوله إلينا. الفصل الثاني الخبر المقبول. الفصل الثالث الخبر المردود. الفصل الرابع الخبر المشترك بين المقبول والمردود. The first chapter, he's going to get into the khabar in depth. The first section is categorizing the khabar with regards to how it reaches us. In other words, how do we get the khabar? Does the khabar come to us with this in this form, with these amount of narrators, Okay, in other words, this means the khabar, according to the author here, the khabar comes to us either through something which is mutawatir, something which is aziz, which is gharib, which is ahad, mashhur, etc. according to the author. And we've explained this in detail with examples in our explanation of Nukhbat al-Fikr. So the point that we're trying to get across is Nukhbat al-Fikr lessons, they're going to go hand in hand with these lessons. And these lessons are going to go hand in hand with the Nukhbat al-Fikr lessons. Also what you learned previously in al-Bayquniyah, let alone what we explain and what we talk about in other lectures and classes. So therefore, this book of Dr. Tahan is considered to be nothing more than a simplification and an expounding upon Nuzhat al-Nazar, the sharh of Nukhbat al-Fikr that was done by Hafiz bin Hajar himself. What Dr. Tahan did, he simplified it, he laid it out, he put it into brackets, he made it into a simple quote-unquote textbook type of style, textbook type of form, but it's the same information. The second section is the accepted khabar, the khabar which is accepted, which is maqbool, whether it's sahih, sahih li ghayrihi, hasan li dhatihi, hasan li ghayrihi, etc. according to the author. According to the author. He then says the third section is the khabar which is rejected, the khabar which is unacceptable. And the fourth and final section of the first chapter is, he says, the khabar which is between these two levels, which is between accepted and between rejected. Moving on. He says, الفصل الأول تقسيم الخبر باعتبار وصوله إلينا. ينقسم الخبر باعتبار وصوله إلينا إلى قسمين. أولا، فإن كان له طرق بلا حصر أو بلا حصر عدد معين فهو المتواتر. ثانيا، وإن كان له طرق محصورة وبعدد معين فهو الآحاد، ولكل منها أقسام وتفاصيل وسأذكرها وأبسطها إن شاء الله تعالى وأبدأ ببحث المتواتر. He says here, the first section is dividing or categorizing the khabar with regards to how it reaches us. And he says there are two main categories. The first is that which reaches us with an unlimited amount of chains. Unlimited amount of chains of narration. And this is called mutawatir. Number two is that which has limited amount of chains of narration. And these are called ahad. Each of these two main categories has further categories, or they have further categories and further details and points of specification. Before we move on any further, as we said before, what we wrote and drew and illustrated on the board is going to help you and assist you in understanding what he's saying here. Khair, inshallah. So we don't want to repeat those things that we mentioned and explained. He says, المبحث الأول الخبر المتواتر. أولا أو ألف أو أولا تعريفه. ألف لغة هو اسم فاعل مشتق من التواتر أي التتابع. تقول تواتر المطر أي تتابع نزوله. باء اصطلاحا ما رواه عدد كثير تحيل العادة تواطؤهم على الكذب. ومعنى تعريف أي هو الحديث أو الخبر الذي يرويه في كل طبقة من طبقات سنده رواة كثيرون يحكم العقل عادة باستحالة أن يكون أولئك الرواة قد اتفقوا على اختلاف هذا الخبر. He says the mutawatir khabar. We previously explained what the khabar meant. He says linguistically it is ism fa'il in the Arabic grammar and the Arabic sarf. You learn ism fa'il. يعني كتب يكتب فهو كاتب. He wrote, he's a katib. كذب يكذب فهو كاذب. شرب يشرب فهو شارب. أكل يأكل فهو آكل. That a person is the doer. In simplified terms, we don't want to use any technical grammatical terms, is the doer of the verb, the performer of the action. It is ism fa'il taken from the verbal noun, the masdar at-tawatur. And the word tawatur linguistically means tatabur, which means consecutive following, concurrent following. The Arabs, they say the matar tawatara. The matar was mutawatir. And what's meant by the matar was mutawatir was it concurrently came down. It poured, it rained, storm after storm, rain after rain, drop after drop, like this, like that. As far as its technical meaning, he says, the mutawatir hadith is the hadith that is reported by a large, great number. A number of people, of narrators that's so great, so huge, is that in most cases it's impossible, and it totally eliminates the possibility or plausibility of them coming together and lying. Okay? Before we move on any further, not to get go into any confusing issues, but just the general concept of why this is foreign to the sciences of hadith, you can clearly see the heavy influence and effect of the intellectual, quote-unquote, rational way of looking at things and what the human mind finds to be reasonable or rational or logical or makes sense is they base it off of aql. Okay? Not saying that there's no aql in the deen. Not saying that we don't use common sense and we don't use reason. We do. But the general concept of making that the precept. Okay? And the heavy reliance upon it in the beginning. That, in general, was not the way of Ahl al-Hadith. Ahl al-Hadith, the ulama of Hadith, yes, without a doubt, they use their uqul. They use aql. They use reasoning. There's no doubt about that. And rationalizing things, sometimes, there's no doubt about that. Allah tells us, and He censures us and condemns us for not using our minds. There's no doubt about that. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Allah says, well, you have any sense. So that's clear. However, the concept of basing everything off the aql and putting it before the revelation, or not even before the revelation, because someone's going to say, there's no revelation about science of hadith. Okay? But just the concept of making that your mainstay. And he says, عادة, that which in most cases prevents people from lying. So this condition is used against the Sahaba now. In order for the hadith to be mutawatir and get to benefits that a person wishes to get from the mutawatir, is that it prevents the people from coming together of lying. Well, the Sahaba lie upon the Prophet ﷺ. So some of the people of knowledge, they say that part of the shart or the ta'rif doesn't pertain to the Sahaba. Okay, no problem. What about the tabi'een? They're not the Sahaba, but they're also noble, pious Muslims as well. Were there people who came from the innovators among the tabi'een? Yes. Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah, he spoke of Ma'bad al-Juhni. Ma'bad al-Juhni, he lived during the time of Hasan al-Basri. And that's the concept in itself. And what's meant by the understanding of the pious predecessors is their ijma', their consensus. What they came together as a whole, and not what an individual tabi'i said. And if that was the case, if every single last person of them, one of them from among them was like that, then why? Then that meant he was an innovator. He spoke on qadr at the time of the tabi'een. And there are many others. Talq ibn Habib he was accused of being a murji'. So the point is that as a whole, would these tabi'een come together and lie upon the Prophet ﷺ? Even those innovators, did they lie? Were they dishonest? Did they fabricate hadith? So that the definition itself, based off of this, is problematic. And the reason why it's problematic is that it's foreign and it's alien, and it's not from what the muhaddithin, ahlul hadith, what they said, what they thought of, what they brought, what they developed. Rather, it's foreign, and it came from the people of those innovative sects, whether it was the Mu'tazila or whether it was the Ash'ira. and those who had a heavy influence on Islamic thought. And we've spoken this before on many classes on what happened to the Islamic sciences, all right, how they were tainted, unfortunately, and how the people who wrote books on usul al-fiqh, specifically on tafsir, on fiqh itself, the Arabic lexicons and dictionaries, many of them were people who had this tainted aqidah, and not just aqidah, but way of thinking, period. And that's why we find these things to this day. And the hadith science, the science of hadith, is not free from it, unfortunately. So we start off as beginners, and as we go further and deeper, we learn certain principles and certain concepts which are, we say, foreign. They have nothing to do with hadith and its people. Everybody understand this? So it's very important for us to separate this from that. The author, rahimahullah, or habibullah, he then says, it is the hadith that is reported by so many people that in most cases, intellectually, customarily, it's impossible for them to unite unanimously upon kadhib. He says this means that in every single tabaqah and every single level of the isnad, as we've explained in our lessons on Nukhbat al-Fikr, there's so many narrators that a person's aql, once again, a person's mind, says this is impossible. No way these guys could have lied for these guys to come together one after one and say the same thing that's false and untrue. Okay? He says this is what's meant here. He then says the conditions of the mutawatir hadith. He says يتبين من شرح تعريف أن التواتر لا يتحقق في الخبر إلا بشروط أربعة وهي ألف أن يرويها عدد كثير وقد اختلف في أقل الكثرة على أقوال المختارة أنه 10 أشخاص. He says here, from the definition and its explanation, it becomes manifest that there are 4 main conditions for a hadith, or not a hadith, for a khabar to be considered mutawatir. 4. The first is that it must be reported by a very large number. A very large number. He then says, and the people, they differ on what is that large number. What is the exact point? What is the breaking point of that large number? He says the strongest view is that there are 10 people. 10 people. In other words, as it's going to come later on, in every single tabaqah, it has to be at least how many narrators? 10. 10 sahaba, 10 tabi'een, 10 atba' tabi'een, until the hadith is collected. So therefore, he says that 10 narrators, according to one's mind and according to one's aql, prevent the hadith or the khabar from being a lie. We don't want to go too far, away from the beginning level. We don't want to dig too deep into this, but just to stop and think about what I'm saying for a second. Who says and who said that 10 people give me that yaqeen? Who said that? Somebody may say 10 isn't enough. 10 people can lie. 10 people can unite. I don't accept it. It has to be more than 10. 20, 30, or 40, or 100, or 1,000. Another person comes and he says, 10 is enough for me. 10 is a good number. Another person comes and he says, I don't need 10. I'll be convinced with 3 honest men. 5 honest people. They came from different parts, different regions. They all were separate. 10 people reported what they saw, eyewitnesses. None of them were in the same car. That's truthful to me. 5, 3. So there is no rule on what is and what isn't. So we see from the basic standpoint is that in itself, we're not going to say it doesn't make any sense. We'll have more humility and respect, but it's not strong. It's not convincing. And the reason why is because it's foreign to hadith. And this is from the affairs of al-usul. And most of the people who wrote books on al-usul, especially during certain generations, we says were upon ways of innovation. There's no doubt about that. Alright? And those who were closer to the sunnah, they had, we said, many foreign concepts and ideals that trickled in and became accepted, unfortunately. And there are many other issues like that up until this day. Okay, unfortunately, those who call themselves Ahlul Hadith, those who call themselves Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, those who call themselves this and that and so on and so forth, if you sit down and you listen to what they say and what they write, you'll find they have so many foreign alien concepts in what they say. That is not from Hadith or Sunnah and not from the way of the Salaf. It's foreign. It's from the ijtihad of this alim of the 20th century or the 21st century. It's from this group, this principle, this concept came from the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. The Ikhwan al-Muslimin, they made that principle, and someone who was from the Ikhwan al-Muslimin left the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, and then he brought those same filthy principles to the way of the Salaf. Unfortunately, this is a very serious concept of these foreign principles and ideals that people have accepted, and we say no, we are not accepting it. I'm sorry. So this is the same here when it comes to Hadith science. To say that 10 people in the tabaqah gives you certainty, it's not strong. There's no doubt about that. And the fact of it being weak doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't make sense, that 10 is not a good number, but it's not going to be agreed upon. 10 people all telling you the same thing from different places or whatever could give you certainty. But who determines from man to man, woman to woman, heart to heart? So the Hadith science is something that is established, something that is laid down and explained and expounded upon in what? In detail. That's one thing. You accept it or reject it. This is what the ulama of Hadith have come together upon 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago. But now you're bringing a logical number, a mathematical equation. Who says that 10 is that number? What if the next man doesn't agree? So that's a problem. Moving on. The author rahimahullah ta'ala then says, أن توجد هذه الكثرة في جميع طبقات السند, is that this abundance must be found in every level of the chain, as we just explained and as we explained before. In other words, 10, 10, 10, 10. And it can't be 10 Sahaba, 7 Tabi'een. No. It can't be 6 Sahaba and 10 Tabi'een. It has to be at least 10 in every tabaqah. If the 20 companions, 10 Tabi'een, 23 Atba' Tabi'een, that's fine. But at least what? 10, according to the author. Jim. And تحيل العادة تواطؤهم على الكذب. He says here, the third condition is that the ada, the custom of the people, in most cases we say that this is impossible to be a lie. In other words, the author is saying that not only does it have to be a lot of narrators, not only do the narrators have to be in every tabaqah, but that's not enough. Now it has to also say that there's no way it can be a lie. They couldn't have conjured this and put this together. He says here in the footnotes, وذلك كان يكون من بلاد مختلفة وأجناس مختلفة ومذاهب مختلفة وما شابه ذلك. بناء على ذلك فقد يكثر عدد المخبرين ولا يثبت للخبر حكم متواتر، وقد يقل العدد نسبيا ويثبت للخبر حكم متواتر، وذلك حسب أحوال الرواة. He then says, and this means, for example, for them to come from different countries, different race, different gender, alright, different understandings and methodologies, schools of thought. He says in things like this. In other words, 10 eyewitnesses tell you what they saw. This eyewitness was a black American. This eyewitness was a white American. Alright? This eyewitness was a girl. This eyewitness was a guy. This eyewitness was a child. This eyewitness was an old lady. This eyewitness was someone whose parents came from China. This eyewitness was like this, so on and so forth. Alright, he's a Christian. This eyewitness was a Muslim. This eyewitness was a Shi'i. This eyewitness was a Jew. This eyewitness was an Orthodox Jew. This eyewitness like this, like that. These different various backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, according to the author, he says this proves that it's not a lie. As far as there were 10 eyewitnesses who are all Christians, it's a different story. 10 eyewitnesses who are all Muslims, different story. 10 eyewitnesses who are all Orthodox Jews, and they say something, that's a different story. because now is a doubt. These guys are coming together to support each other because they're Jews. They're coming together to support each other just because they're Muslims. These are 10 women. They're only saying that because for the cause of it's different. So it eliminates and it throws out that doubt. Everybody clear on this? He then says, so based off of this, he says, now listen very carefully to what the author says. He says that the number of the mukhbirin, those who give information, those who tell us about a khabar, he says they can be abundant without having the ruling of tawatur. And the numbers could be less and small, but it does give the ruling of mutawatir. How is this, you may say? Kayf hada. You just said that it has to be 10. Now you said it can be more than 10 without being mutawatir, and less than 10 and giving mutawatir. He says this depends on the state of the narrators. In other words, 10 strong narrators is not like 20 total liars. 100%. But it proves the feebleness of the argument. Is there a number or not? Yes or no? Yes or no? Is there a specific number or not? That's what I want to know. So it's a problem going back and forth. Okay? And the concept of it's clearly based off of, as you can see, ijtihad. It's ijtihad. One alim says it's mutawatir, and another alim says what? It isn't. So how can it be? One is certainty, yaqini, qat'i, and another alim says la, it's totally weak and false. Such as the hadith that states la wasiyata li warith. There is no will to be written for an heir. Someone that inherits from you, you can't write him, put him in your will. Some look at the say hadith is mutawatir, and others will say hadith is totally false. So it's a problem. We don't want to go too far in that. We'll stop here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surely knows best. Bless Allah to give us true understanding and knowledge, and allow us to benefit from these beneficial books of the people of knowledge, of past and of present. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.